Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. It's 10 a.m. on the dot, so why don't we give folks just another minute to join? I believe we had 150 or so registered for today's Catalyst program information session. So we'll just give folks another minute to enter our meeting room. Um, Getting up there. Okay, well, while we wait, I can get started with sort of the intro to folks on the line today, as well as uh, intro to the session today. So, again, thanks for joining this morning. This is the 2026 Catalyst Grant Program information session. Um, we'll have lots of folks online today, but I wanted to point out that we have Marina Caceres. She's the program manager for MBRC's Forest Economy Program and the Timber for Transit program. Um, she has some sessions going on later today. So if you're interested in any of those programs, be sure to visit the events webpage of MBRC's website and get registered for those. We also have Casey Haynes. He's MBRC's program coordinator. And I have not checked to see if there's anyone else from MBRC on the line. So if you are and I didn't shout you out, I apologize for that. But let's see. This session today, it's going to provide a more in-depth presentation on the Catalyst program and the pre-application process. Um, You'll see by our agenda, it's sort of broken into two parts. The first part will briefly review topics like eligibility, eligible locations, match requirements. These are all topics that are also covered in the program overview series. So you'll hear me direct you to the program overview series. There are 8 individual sessions that we've pre-recorded by topic. In particular, you'd want to review parts 1 through 4. Um, those are some of the topics that we'll briefly highlight today, but you can get more information in these program overview series sessions. And if you're looking for more information on the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, and Build American, Buy American Act, or BABA, these are also covered in part 3. Okay, and the sort of second part of today's session, we'll review in more detail the pre-application requirements and questions. And this is really meant to serve as a guide to completing the application. Or the pre-application. We'll also highlight the resources that are available to support you in this process and the resources available to support you using the grants management system, or the GMS. Okay, looks like getting close to 100. So we'll go ahead and dive in to today's session. I also wanted to remind you to feel free to use the chat box. I can see folks are. Oh, no, that was an AI. Never mind. Not a real message. That was an AI bot. Um, Feel free to use the chat box feature to ask questions throughout the session. Casey and Marina will be monitoring the chat box for questions, and we can also take time for live Q&A throughout today's session. Okay, so the Catalyst program is MBRC's flagship program. It's gone through multiple iterations at this point, um, and it is designed to stimulate economic growth and inspire partnerships that improve rural economic vitality across the MBRC region. This is an economic development program, and it's specifically designed to support a broad range of initiatives and state economic priorities that will modernize and expand the region's basic infrastructure, revitalize communities to support and attract the region's workforce, and generate economic activity and benefits for the region. So we'll go over a few of the basics for the Catalyst 2026 funding opportunity, and all of the details that I mentioned today can be found on the Catalyst program webpage. Okay. So in 2026, MBRC anticipates making a minimum of $30 million available for grants. Um, Additional funds may be made available through a revised Catalyst grant program announcement, so stay tuned if we add additional funds for this year. These funds will be available in both spring and the fall rounds. So we have two funding rounds. There will be funds available in both of those rounds. Funds are distributed equally across the four states in our region, and all awards, of course, are subject to the availability of funds. These are the most important dates to be aware of for 2026. Right now, we're in the pre-application phase for the spring round. Um, Pre-applications are due February 27th of this year. We also have the fall round dates on this slide as well, in case you're interested in the later dates. Um, you can find these dates as well as, one other important date to be aware of is when the grants management system is open for registration, as well as when the grants management system is open to begin the pre-application process. Um, right now, the GMS is open for pre-applications and for registration. So you can go in and do those, begin those tasks now. And the fall round, those dates are in our program timeline. For the Catalyst program, there are six sort of eligible purpose categories. These, if you've applied to Catalyst in the past, these should be familiar to you. There's basic public infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and telecommunications infrastructure. There's also business and workforce development, basic healthcare, and resource conservation, tourism, and recreation. So we're looking for projects that align with one of those six categories. And you can find additional information and examples of those categories in the program user manual, part 2A. That's the Catalyst component of the program user manual. There's also additional resources such as the program overview series on Catalyst, which is part 5, and we go into more details on those categories. The Catalyst program classifies projects based on that sort of primary purpose, those eligible purpose categories, as well as the grant type. So it may seem complicated, but really it comes down to aligning with one of the categories and then reviewing sort of the definitions and requirements for each of the grant types. We have feasibility grants and implementation grants. Feasibility are really more of those early planning type project activities, and those are in support of any type of infrastructure project. So in Catalyst, feasibility projects are in support of a future implementation of a infrastructure project. So it needs to relate to one of those three infrastructure categories, and it's focused more on early stage activities for those types of projects. Um, the other type of award would be an implementation grant. Um, those have varying sort of requirements based on the eligible category. And we do have, I find it to be really helpful to look at it visually. There's a summary table in the user manual, as well as a really detailed classification sort of guide document, which is listed as Appendix H in the user manual. And then, of course, I'll point you back to part 5 of the program overview series, where we demonstrate how to use that table and those resources. Um, but you'll want to, again, make sure your project aligns with an eligible purpose, review the two grant types, and then that will tell you, based on those two criteria together, that will give you what the maximum MBRC request amount for your project is. All feasibility projects have a maximum request of $100,000. It's in that implementation award that you'll want to review closely to make sure you understand if your project is eligible for up to 500,000, up to 1 million, or in some cases, if you meet certain criteria and you have state program manager approval, you can request up to $3 million for infrastructure projects. Okay. A quick review of eligibility. These are the applicants that are eligible to receive funds, state governments, local governments, other subdivisions of state, which can include public school districts or regional planning commissions, secondary and career technical centers, nonprofits, and I'll just highlight that it's all 501c designated organizations. Often we hear, 501c3, but it's really, there's a whole bunch of other numbers that can come after the C, and it's really any of the 501c designated organizations and federally recognized tribes. Essentially, for-profit entities are not eligible for funding, and many other entities are eligible for funding. So take a look at that list and make sure you're one of those eligible entities. Additionally, projects and organizations need to be part of our region. So there are 64 counties in our service area across Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York. Um, the full list of the counties in the MBRC service area can be found on our website, along with information on how each county or geography has been um, calculated for the distress criteria. So MBRC is required to annually assess the level of economic and demographic distress. Those resulting designations reflect whether MBRC can provide grants within a county and the associated match rate. So once you have determined that your project location is eligible within our region, then we can move on to determine what your match rate will be. There are sort of three designations a county or a community may receive. That's distressed, transitional, or attainment. You can see in this table, which is from our our project match and eligibility webpage. You can see the whether or not those counties are eligible, those designations are eligible to receive funds, as well as the associated grant match rate requirement. So distressed comes with a 20% match rate requirement, transitional a 50% match rate requirement, and attainment counties, they're technically not eligible to receive funds unless they meet one of three conditions. So there could be an isolated area of distress. You'll want to look at the list of isolated areas of distress to determine whether that location is eligible to receive funding. There, a project could be part of a multi-county or a multi-state project that includes at least one distressed or transitional county. So if you have an attainment county mixed in with some of these other counties, that is an eligible way to receive funds. The third is if you qualify and receive a significant benefit waiver. So we'll go through those again, but a good overview of how we classify each of the counties and how that's related to the match rate. Also, this year, MBRC began to evaluate the distress at the county and the community level. So, if you've participated in the Catalyst program before, you may notice some of the language has changed around, also including distress at the community level. It's really designed to give the most accurate picture of distress in an area, so that if your community may not be reflected by the county designation, we wanted to give the most beneficial match rate based on the ground conditions. Okay, so sort of alluded to this process a little already, but here it is in writing, determining your match rate. First, you want to make sure the project location is in the MBRC service area. Then, based on that location, you want to identify if the project is in a distressed, transitional, or attainment geography. Again, if your project is in that attainment geography, you'll want to determine if one of the three exceptions apply. Um, and you can find that information in our 2026 distress criteria on the MBRC website. You'll also be able to use match tools to identify that reimbursement and match rate associated with your project location or locations. And you can go to that webpage to get all of this information, including that table and access to all of the tools. A quick highlight of the tools. Again, I really encourage you to go to that program overview series, part 2A, as well as this web page to become familiar with these tools. Um, but essentially, we've developed a few new tools to help you identify your match rate. If your project has a single location, so it's just happening in one county or one community, it's probably best to go with the PDF list with the match rate or the interactive map. Those tools are specifically designed to help single projects with a single location. If your project has multiple locations, multiple counties, or multiple communities, the best tool to use is the match rate calculator. Again, this is all linked off of the web page for Project Match. Um, but you'll want to use that to identify the match rate for your project for multiple locations. Each of these tools will result in a match rate percentage. So you may get a 20% match rate, a 50% match rate, or something averaged between the two. Um, and it will also give you a geoid. And these two pieces of information need to be entered into the pre-application, um, the locations tab of the pre-application to identify and justify the match rate for your project. There's a prompt in the pre-application. You'll be able to see where that goes. But again, these are the tools that give you that information to enter into the pre-application. Okay. I've mentioned the word waiver a couple times, so I'm going to take the opportunity to go through the three potential waivers for your project that may apply to your project. All waivers are due with the pre-application. We do not accept waiver requests after the pre-application due date. So it's important to be aware of whether or not these apply to you and your project. You can also, again, find more information on the waivers in part 2 of the program overview series. So if you have an open award with MBRC, so in any of the programs, you may have an open forest economy program award, another catalyst award open, um, the 75% expenditure waiver may be required. So across all programs, if you have an open award, meaning an active award that hasn't been closed out, you cannot receive an additional MBRC investment until the current award has both submitted reimbursement requests totaling 75% or more and has demonstrated that 75% or more of the cost share has been expended. So essentially, if your project has not used 75% or more of its MBRC requested money or the included match for the project before the first of the month of the pre-application deadline, so that would be February 1st today, or for this round, you will need to apply for a 75% expenditure waiver. And this waiver is available in the pre-application in the GMS, where you can download it, complete the waiver, and then upload the completed waiver form. And then these will be reviewed as part of the pre-application. Um, If your organization is not located in the MBRC service area, the significant benefit waiver may be required for your project. So entities located within an attainment county, but not within a distressed or transitional community. So if you look at that attainment county list and then you look at the communities within the attainment county, if your county or if your community is not listed as distressed or transitional, you would need to submit a significant benefit waiver. Um, Also, if your entity is located outside of the MBRC region, but within a member state. So if you're not within one of the counties in our territory, but you are still within Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, or New York, you would need to submit a significant benefit waiver. The significant benefit waiver is a form, again, in the GMS that you can download and complete. It will ask you it will ask you to share specific information about the economic benefits that your project would bring to a distressed or transitional community or county. Um, and something different this year is all of that information will be captured within the form itself. So you don't have to attach additional documentation. It should all be included in the waiver form itself. Um, and that request is then reviewed by the federal co-chair and the four governors alternates for, so that they can assess the economic benefits to our distressed and transitional geographies. Just realized that the LDD waiver request slide is missing from this presentation, so I'll just briefly outline it. It is covered in the program user manual, and it is part of, it has its own appendix. I think it's Appendix C or D of the user manual. So the LDD waiver, that is really for, so all Catalyst projects are required to use an LDD for grant administration services. Um, and so that's sort of like built-in technical assistance to support your project and make sure you're able to meet the MBRC requirements throughout the project lifecycle. If you are an entity of state, so a state government entity, or an LDD yourself, you are exempt from that requirement. Um, if you are an applicant organization that has previous experience with using MBRC's grants management system, or other extenuating circumstances, you may be able to apply for an LDD waiver. This would also make you exempt from that requirement. So it's highly encouraged to use LDDs. They have that technical assistance that they can provide you for quarterly reporting, for financial reporting, for amendments, all the changes that might come along with your project. During its life with us. So it's highly encouraged to use them. Again, if one of those exemptions apply, you do not need to use an LDD, or if you receive an approved LDD waiver, you would not need to use an LDD. I'll get that slide added in here for when we put it up on our website. Okay. So I'm just going to pause as we transition to sort of that second part of our talk today. Were there any questions online that we should cover, or does anyone have a question about the slides that we've covered so far?
Hey, Adrian, it's Marina. There's one question here that I think Casey and I have gotten to most questions, but there's one that I wanted to bring up, which is, let's see, Elizabeth Kane says, we identified our purpose as business and workforce development, services, programs, and facilities that create, retain, or expand businesses. Can we still qualify under classification for multi-jurisdictional infrastructure, or are we restricted to the business and workforce development classification? I don't know if you want to answer that now or later on in
Sure.
the session.
Yeah, no, I can answer that. So the multi-jurisdiction infrastructure and the infrastructure higher maximum awards are specifically for the infrastructure categories. So they must be focused on transportation infrastructure, basic public infrastructure, or telecommunications infrastructure. And those also have a few other requirements, including more than 50% of the project costs have to be devoted to construction. So typically, if a project is business and workforce development, even if you're building something like a facility, it is not an infrastructure project. Um, so in this case, it would be eligible, based on my understanding, it would be eligible for a maximum of up to $500,000. All right, well, I will move into the pre-application. Um, this is what we're all focused on right now, is creating and submitting pre-applications. So these are sort of the general steps that are required to complete a pre-application. Um, and you'll see sort of a little note probably on all of the future slides, to go to the resource called Creating and Submitting a Pre-Application. This is really a step-by-step guide for using the GMS and how to create and submit a pre-application. Um, so make sure there's a link to it in this presentation, but that is something that's really helpful to have open and available as you start this process. A couple other tips. Um, I won't go over all of the steps because we're going to go over each of them in subsequent slides. But when you do create the pre-application in the GMS, it's recommended to write down your pre-application number. It should look something like PR-MBRC- a number. And it's really helpful to write that down, so that you can find it later when you log out and come back to the system. And that can help you avoid creating multiple pre-applications in the system. We have in the past have had folks create multiple pre-applications, and it can be confusing when you log back in to recall which pre-application you're actually working on. So really helpful to write that number down so that you can find that when you log back into the system. Okay. So One of the first steps to beginning the pre-application process is actually registering your organization in the GMS. This is a separate process from the pre-application. So if you have not yet registered your organization for the GMS and you are interested in applying for the spring round, please go ahead and do that as soon as possible. This is not an automated process. This is something that MBRC reviews each of the registration requests as they come in. Um, and there may be some follow-up questions that MBRC has for you about your organization. So really critical to do that early. There is some information that you'll want to have available as part of that registration process. And this information will also sort of carry over into the pre-application once you create that pre-application. So you'll want to be able to identify the type of organization, kind of going back to that slide on eligibility, whether or not you're a state entity, you're a nonprofit, you'll have to identify one of those eligible organizations during the registration process. You'll enter the EIN number for your organization. And one important note on that is MBRC uses the location associated with that EIN to determine if your organization is based within our region, our service area, or not. You'll also want to enter your unique entity ID or your UEI number. And this is something that you can register for at sam.gov. So if you do not yet have a UEI number, please go ahead and register for sam.gov and obtain a UEI number as soon as possible. Yeah, I think that's it for registration. There is a specific guide on our resources webpage called Registering Your Organization's Account. And that is, again, step-by-step guidance for completing the registration process. Once you've registered, then you can begin the process of creating a pre-application. And the next few slides, we're going to walk through, detail all of the pre-application questions and requirements. Um, I will mention that when you're in the creating and submitting a pre-application resource, there are a few steps involved for finding the funding opportunity in the GMS. So you'll need to locate the funding opportunity. And then one step that sometimes folks miss is the qualifying step. There's really not much you have to do to qualify other than press a button that says qualify. And that will then open up that funding opportunity and the pre-applications for you. So just pointing out that step, it is outlined in that step-by-step guidance document, but just highlighting it here as well. So once you're sort of in the pre-application, it's going to ask you a few questions, including if you've had a previous award with MBRC and to enter those award numbers. So if you have had a previous award with MBRC, that's a good piece of information to have available so that you can enter in your previous award numbers. It's going to ask you if your project is in a rural community. MBRC defines rural as a population of less than 5,000. And also is going to ask you if your project serves an underserved community. And you can find that definition in our program user manual. I think I give it later in the slides today as well. It will ask you about the primary place of performance for your project. So essentially, where will the project physically take place? This is sometimes different than the place your office is located. This is really asking for the specific place where your project will occur. It will also ask you to give your project a title. We encourage a unique title. Um, Often we see Catalyst 2026 application, and that is not super descriptive. So when we're in there, it's really helpful to see a unique title. It doesn't have to be long. It can be short, but just something to identify your project specifically. In the pre-application, MBRC also asks for specific budget information. There are sort of three components to the budget tab of the pre-application. The budget table, this is sort of at the top of the budget tab, and you may need to select a little plus sign to make the full budget table appear. But this is where you'll be asked to enter your project costs by category. There are multiple categories for costs. Those are sort of the rows of the table. And so you can enter the costs associated with each category. You'll also divide those costs up in each category by where the funds for that will be coming from. So the share columns, those are the columns of the table. You'll see NBRC share, you'll see other federal, you'll see applicant match and other. And so you'll want to be able to demonstrate where the costs are, where the funds are coming from for each of those costs. A couple things the budget table will do. It will sort of validate or calculate that the match requirement has been met. So that required minimum match for your project, again, it could be that 20%, 50%, or something averaged between the two. It will calculate that you've satisfied that requirement. Match is calculated off of the total project costs. So that minimum match requirement, if you have $100,000 total project cost, you'll need to provide 50,000 in match, and you can request 50,000 from MBRC. So it's based off that total project cost number. Um, and that's how it will be calculating. It will be adding up the applicant match column, the other federal column, and the other column to see that amount together is meeting that match requirement. The budget table will also calculate or validate that all federal funds are under the federal funding ceiling. That's a program requirement that we cover in the Part 2 overview program series. No, Part 3, sorry, Part 3 program overview series. Um, and essentially, the federal funding ceiling is no more than 80% of all total project costs can come from a federal source. And so this budget table will be calculating whether or not the project exceeds that 80% threshold. The second component to the budget tab is the budget narrative. This is a text box where you'll be asked to sort of list and describe expenses that are over $5,000. You can also, add a little information about any cost estimates or how you've arrived at your cost estimates for those larger costs. And the third component is the match table. This is your match sources table. It's at the bottom of the tab. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see this. And this is where you can provide a description of your match sources, what the specific source is, whether it's federal or non-federal, and sort of the status of the match. If it's something that you've secured or you've applied for. If there are some match if there's some amount of your match that you're not sure where it will come from, that's okay too. You can enter, to be determined with an amount as well. So that match table will want to, the total amount of match in that table will need to align with the amount of match that's in the budget table as well. So there are three parts of the budget tab, the budget information that we collect. Here's a look at those budget categories that will be asked for in the budget tab, in that budget table. I'll point out that they align with what we call the SF424 CBW. That's a detailed sort of Excel spreadsheet budget document. We do not require the SF424 CBW with your pre-application. It is required with the full application, so that's why the budget categories align with that form. Eventually, if you're invited for a full application, you'll also be filling out that 424 CBW. Okay. So after the budget tab, we'll be looking at the narrative questions. There are 5 narrative questions, and I'll go through each of those now. They all have a character limit of 5,000 characters. We encourage you to prepare those responses in a Word document and then copy and paste that information into the GMS. Sometimes in that process, you can sort of collect something called hidden characters. So if for some reason you receive an error message saying you're over the character limit, but you've gone back and you've confirmed that you have fewer than 5,000 characters, that may be because of this hidden character issue. And at that point, you would want to copy and paste your content into, as plain text type program such as Notepad, and then re-put it into Notepad, then take it back out of Notepad and put it into the GMS. That process will sort of strip out all of the invisible formatting characters. So hopefully that doesn't happen. We've been trying to fix that bug for a few rounds now, but if it does, that's why. It's not because you're actually over the character limit, it's because of those hidden characters. So we just like to point that out early for you in case you run into that. Um, Okay, and I also wanted to mention that 5,000 characters, that's sort of roughly equivalent to 2 to 3 pages. So we're certainly not expecting you to enter 2 to 3 pages of information for each of these responses, and that space is definitely there if you need it. But we encourage, clear and concise responses, and don't feel like you have to use all of the characters. Okay, so the first narrative question that I wanted to go over is the project abstract. This is really the place where you can provide sort of the basic idea of your project and how it fits with the Catalyst program. Um, we would expect it to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 paragraphs long. Um, and you can cover sort of the primary purpose of your project, what your main goal is, the primary location of your project, a really sort of high level description of who will benefit from your project and the expected economic and community impacts of your project. Think of this as like a place where you can put your elevator sort of speech for your project. We'll also look that you identify that relevant eligible purpose category. Um, and if your project is an infrastructure category, to describe how you meet that threshold for infrastructure. Again, it's primarily 50% of your costs are in construction for an infrastructure project. If you're requesting a higher maximum award size, above $1 million, this is also where you will describe how your project meets the criteria and whether or not you've confirmed this request with the state program manager. Um, we'd also ask that you share the status of the project, whether it's sort of still in the early planning stages or it's absolutely ready for implementation right now. Um, and again, just giving a general sense of what your project will do with MBRC funds. So that's the project abstract. Next is project goals, outcomes, and outputs. Um, you'll be asked to list and explain sort of the expected economic and community outcomes. You can find some additional information about the types of things the Catalyst program is looking for in our MBRC scoring criteria, as well as the state scoring criteria. Those are appendices at the end of the program user manual, but that's a great place to review for the types of information that we're looking for in these narrative responses. So some of the things to include here include, evidence of need, tangible economic benefits for the local area or the broader region, um, a description of key stakeholder support, clearly defined economic outcomes, and whether or not a project leads to permanent job and or business creation. We're essentially looking here for the argument for funding, why MBRC funds are important to this project. You can also use Appendix E of our user manual, the key performance indicators, to give you an idea of some of the outcomes and impacts that MBRC is measuring for its projects. And again, just reiterating that all of these narratives, I'm really covering a lot of the MBRC perspective, but there's also the state program scoring criteria, and that's equally important to address in these narrative responses. Program investment priorities narrative. This is an opportunity to describe how your project meets MBRC and state program priorities. For MBRC, I'll point you to our scoring criteria, specifically the alignment with investment and program priorities scoring criteria. And this is where you'll describe, in particular, um, whether or not your project serves or benefits underserved communities. Um, and I did say I would share the definition of that. Um, it's areas within the region as classified as distressed according to our statute, including high rates of poverty, unemployment, or outmigration. Communities that suffer from a combination of socioeconomic and environmental burdens, including high unemployment, poverty, and lack of basic resources. Um, so this is where you can describe how your project benefits underserved communities. That's one of the priorities for MBRC. Also, this is where you can describe if your project contributes to community resilience. That's a second MBRC program investment priority. So if your project contributes to community resilience, such as how it may help communities prevent, reduce, withstand, and or improve recovery from extreme weather, or if your project strengthens physical, behavioral, and social health of the community to withstand and adapt to current and projected public health emergencies. This is the place where you would make those connections between your project and those two priorities. Again, also review the state program priorities, um, either in their state economic development plans or in the state scoring criteria. This is also a great topic to discuss with a state program manager if you have a meeting with one of the program managers to talk about which program priorities your project fits with. This is the place to share that information as well. Okay. Um, the project beneficiaries and community context. This is again an opportunity to share more about the community impact and who specifically will benefit from your project. You can describe sort of the larger beneficiaries of your project, the direct beneficiaries of your project. Um, you don't necessarily have to repeat information that you may have provided around underserved communities. Those should have already been described in that previous narrative around priorities. Um, you can describe if your project benefits rural communities here. But really the most important piece to this question is, why is this project important to the community? Use this space to help demonstrate meaningful community support, um, and really kind of share that community context for your project. And the final narrative question is the statement of need. This is where you can share about the specific challenge or problem your project is addressing, the proposed solution, and the importance of completing this project at this time, um, and describing why MBRC funding is important to this project and to this opportunity at this time. It's really looking for, you to describe sort of the urgency of the project, and helping us understand why this is critical to supporting your economy. All right, at this point, that's essentially the end of the pre-application narrative questions. So the next step would be to, if you've had any waivers, to also upload the waivers to the pre-application. Um, so once you've completed the narrative questions, the budget information, and any applicable waivers, you'll proceed to submitting the pre-application. Um, and again, I'll point you to that step-by-step guidance document. I'll also highlight that if for some reason when you submit your pre-application, you receive error messages, I really wanted to highlight that those common error messages are described, and sort of the solutions or fixes are described in this document as well. So if you go to the end of the creating and submitting a pre-application guidance document, that's where the common error messages can be found. And of course, if you can't resolve those, you can reach out to NBRC as well. But wanted to make sure you knew where the error messages can be found. Next, NBRC in the States, as soon as you submit your pre-applications, right after the February 27th deadline, will begin to evaluate and review the pre-applications. NBRC focuses primarily on eligibility and alignment with programs, and the state program really considers alignment with their priorities. And so in this phase, you'll either you'll either be invited to apply with to the full application phase, um, or you will receive a recommendation to resubmit in the future with feedback, um, or you may receive an ineligible determination. Um, I'll mention that the invitation to apply will also likely include feedback. So when you receive those invitations to apply, review them closely for feedback. You should hear back from MBRC in the States during the week of March 30th. And then you'll have 3 weeks to complete the application phase. All right, so in summary, sort of what's next, go back, confirm your eligibility and whether or not you need to include waivers with your pre-application. Make sure you register your organization in the GMS. Obtain a UEI number and a SAM.gov account. Review the project classification details to determine your maximum award size in Appendix H of the program user manual. Meet with a state program manager if you need to discuss your project further or if you plan to request more than $1 million. And then initiate your pre-application. Get started with that. We really recommend submitting early and not waiting until 5 p.m. on February 27th or on the due date to submit that pre-application because of the potential for those errors. So please submit early so we can avoid any late applications or error issues. And then these next 2 slides really are just covering the resources that I've mentioned already today. So they're here for you as a resource as well. And I realized that was so much talking. I don't like to talk that much. I'm sorry to have put you through that. But why don't we open it up for questions and answers now? Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Yes, Allison. Let's see. Allison. I need to allow your mic. There, you should be able to use your mic now, Allison.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So I posed this question in the chat and Marina suggested we talk about it in question and answer. So I'm asking about the possibility of presenting a joint application if you have a partner organization. Is the best way to do that to choose one organization as the applicant organization and list the other organization as a contracted like subrecipient almost, or is there a way to actually apply formally as a joint application?
Yeah, so our GMS system is set up that there's a primary applicant, and that should be the entity that will be the one doing the reporting and managing the project. So the primary applicant should really be the sort of face of the project, proverbially and literally. And then there could be, it depends on what sort of involvement the other entity has in the project. Um, there could be a co-applicant, and the way to designate that would be as a contact in the application. There's sort of a role or like a label for that contact that you can say is a co-applicant. And that should be used for projects where there might be like real estate owned by that entity that's part of the project, or where a project is taking place is a location that they own. Um, it otherwise, I mean, that's really sort of one of the big reasons we have a co-applicant is for if a project is taking place or is focused on real estate that's owned by another organization. Otherwise, it may also just be more appropriate to have the person, like you were saying, be a subrecipient that's outlined in all of the project materials and can be approved ahead of time as part of the project. So I guess maybe we can take it offline to see which one fits your situation the best. But there is an option to be a co-applicant or just to be listed as a subrecipient of the project. Okay, hopefully that helps. Let's see, Erin, I see your hand is up. Erin, if you'd like to come off mute and ask your question, you can. You should have the ability to use your mic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Adrian, for a great presentation. I did have a question just related to the project beneficiaries. Project that I'm planning on submitting will have direct beneficiaries as well as indirect elsewhere in the county. Is that something that you feel as though should be included more so in the narrative or, under the project beneficiaries and the community context?
Yeah, I think I would capture the indirect sort of benefits in the narrative. That's definitely sort of that broader community context that we're looking for. Late as you develop sort of project outcomes or key performance indicators, we're looking for those direct beneficiaries when we're talking about outcomes or key performance indicators. But of course, we don't want to miss that sort of broader impact, and that would be something to include in the narrative.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Catherine, you should be able to access your mic. Okay. Catherine, feel free to come off mute if you'd like to ask your question.
It's like she's not able to unmute.
Hmm. Okay.
Um,
Well,
I
we'll
do
try to
have
figure.
Adrian,
Sure.
as we went through, just kind of push some questions that folks were putting in the chat to this session. So I will address that, and maybe Catherine's is one of them. So if you don't mind, I'll go through, I think 4 I have right now.
Sure.
The first one is regarding the total budget for an implementation project. Is there a maximum % of the budget that can be allocated to planning and design?
Okay, so for a construction project, in implementation, well, I guess, okay. Um, I don't know that we have a maximum amount that can be devoted to planning. But if it is primarily a planning project, then that would, and it's an infrastructure category, that would be a feasibility project. If it's an infrastructure project and there are more than 50% of the costs go towards construction costs, theoretically, the other 50% can go towards things like planning activities. So those are the sort of two nuances for implementation of or for infrastructure categories. So again, if it's primarily planning related for infrastructure, that's feasibility. If it's infrastructure and there is 50% more of the cost towards construction, that can be considered implementation of infrastructure, and the other 50% can go towards planning. Um, if it's in a non-infrastructure category, generally just straight up planning isn't necessarily a task for an activity that's supported in those areas, technical assistance can be supported. But generally just general planning is not part of the other um, three categories. So let me know if that didn't clarify anything for you, or if you want to follow up with more specifics.
Adrian, this is Catherine. I finally got access to my mic.
Oh,
that was
great.
my question. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that does help clarify a bit. It's not an infrastructure project we're talking about. So I guess I would just want to clarify slightly a little bit more. When I say planning, I mean a little bit more specifically like A&E, like design fees, not so much the conceptual planning of a project, but those direct project related costs. That could still be part of the project budget.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Adrienne. I was able to give folks access to microphones and camera, so hopefully people will have an easier time now. I'll have to check for my sessions that's enabled. So the next question I have here is advising a little bit more on the process to receive a notice to proceed, including the NEPA review and approval and budget of contractors and kind of procurement. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit on process to notice to
Sure.
proceed.
Sure. Yeah, the notice to proceed is sort of that final stage of permission to be able to begin work on your project. So this is after pre-application, after application, and after the award is made. You would work your way to a notice to proceed. And in order to receive the notice to proceed, there are a few things you need to have in place. I won't go over the full list, but since you mentioned NEPA, you need to have NEPA approval for your project. NEPA is described a bit more on our NEPA website on the MBRC NEPA webpage, and also in that part 3 of the program overview series. But essentially, a project, all MBRC projects require a NEPA process. And that process can be pretty quick if it's determined to be a categorical exclusion, and fits one of those categories for MBRC. Some projects fall into a categorical exclusion, but they may need an additional consultation with a resource agency, or we may be working to adopt a categorical exclusion from another federal NEPA review process. And those can take a little bit longer, in the 3-month range to receive that approval. Other projects that involve, maybe major construction or other sort of disturbances to the environment, and those may be categorized as an environmental assessment, and that can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So it's important to be aware of what type of project you have and how that might fit into our NEPA categories as you're planning your overall timeline of when your project can begin with that full notice to proceed. Is that helpful? Did I get everything?
I think so. There was another half of that question that asked if we build ample time in for, NEPA review, et cetera, but are able to implement sooner, if the process takes less time, is that okay?
Absolutely. As soon as the process is complete, we will issue the notice to proceed. So if your NEPA process goes more quickly than you expected, you don't have to, you're not beholden to the timeline you put in your application if we can do it more quickly. Yeah.
Awesome. I have to jump to prep for the next info session, but I will
Yeah.
pop the last question that I saved in the chat for you to
Thanks,
answer.
Marina.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Thank you. And I apologize that we're running over today. but I do see a few more hands up. I'll just mention if you have questions after today, feel free to send them to admin@nbrc.gov. This is sort of our main email channel. So you can send any questions you have that pop up for you to that email address. I'll put it in here in the chat so you have it. But in the meantime, I'll keep taking questions. I can stay longer, but if you jump off and you have a question later, please feel free to email us with that question. Let's see, Scarlett, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. My question, I think, was actually the last question Mariana was going to ask, but it's about the federal funding cap. I saw on the part 3, the funding policies and requirement, that if we have other federal funds that represent the bulk of the program budget, the NBRC funds could actually act as the non-federal match. And, we're looking at a few different funding scenarios for a multi-facility large-scale planning initiative. So the NBRC feasibility cap would not cover the full estimate. So I'm wondering if we were to go after like a CDS type grant, we could then use NBRC funds to fill out the rest of that award, is my first
Yeah.
question. And then
Sure.
second, what would the matching requirement then look like that for that? Would it still be the full program budget or just the NBRC award?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I will start with the federal funding ceiling. We did last year receive flexibility to, I guess you would say, exceed the federal funding ceiling when, as you've described, MBRC is not the primary, not the only, and not the primary source of funding for a project. So, for example, since you brought up CDS, if you have a project and you've received congressional discretionary spending award for $500,000 and you're also interested in applying for NBRC funds, if the NBRC funding is less than the amount you received from another federal source like CDS, then NBRC funds for our purposes would no longer count as federal funds. So that's a sort of a unique flexibility we received in our reauthorization. So yes, we can look at projects where you may not have a lot of non-federal or any non-federal sources in them, as long as NBRC is not the sole or largest funder in that sort of funding stack for a project. There is still a match requirement, so NBRC has always considered federal sources as potential match for a project. So the match requirement still exists, but you can use applicant source, you can use federal sources, you can use state sources as to satisfy that match requirement. And match is calculated on the total project cost. So if the total project cost is $1 million and you have a 50% match requirement, that's a $500,000 match requirement. And again, those sources can be made up of, federal sources, local sources, really any source. And typically that federal funding is capped at 80% of the total project costs, unless there's a unique situation where NBRC is not that primary or the sole or primary funder of a project. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you. I think so.
Okay.
I just want to understand, so to your example, if it's an $1 million budget and we received, say, 5 to 800,000 from CDS or other federal sources, if that did not have a separate match requirement, then NBRC's match requirement would have been satisfied through that. If we're applying for a lesser amount through NBRC.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, a lot of nuances in there. Um, okay, I don't see any other hands up. I do see a question, how is match percentage determined, in the chat box? That is based on whether your project is in a distressed, transitional, or a isolated area of distress, community, or maybe your project also receives a significant benefit waiver. But the match percentage is based on that distress criteria associated with your project, which we went over earlier. And there's also the project match and eligibility webpage with the tools to help you identify what that match percentage is for your project location. Procurement, yes. Right. The compliance manual should be back online so soon. Apologies for it not being there at the moment. Most things haven't changed, but there are a few changes we needed to update for this program year. Procurement, in general, for MBRC awards, procurement needs to happen after you receive the notice to proceed. So any costs, whether they're from MBRC funds or from matching funds, no costs can be expended or incurred or committed before you receive the notice to proceed. So procurement needs to happen after the notice to proceed. MBRC is also, our procurement needs to be an open and fair competition style procurement. So that means multiple estimates for projects that are under the simplified acquisition threshold, as well as multiple bids for projects that exceed that threshold. So the compliance manual is a great resource for understanding those different thresholds for the types of procurement requirements that may apply to your project. But essentially, that procurement needs to happen after the notice to proceed, and you need to follow sort of that open and fair competition policy. Great. And I see Sarah Demers from Maine put in a reminder that if you'd like to meet with a state program manager, please share a project interest form before you request a meeting. That really applies for each of the states. The project interest form, she linked it here, but it's also on our website. And that can be used to really just share the high level points of your project with a state program manager, so that you guys can have, a more meaningful discussion of your project. So thanks for sharing that, Sarah. If you are, so there's one question about the match calculator. Again, there's sort of 3 different tools available to help you understand what your match rate is or what the best match rate for your project is. If you have a single location, such as a county or a single community, you can use one of the first 2 tools. It's that PDF list of counties and communities, or the shoot, I forget which it was. It's the I think it's an interactive map. Those are the 2 best tools for if you have a single location. If you have multiple locations, multiple counties or multiple communities, then the match calculator is the best tool for you. And that allows you to, again, select either multiple counties or multiple communities, and it will average the match rate for you. So you'll need to determine if it's a county level match for your project or a community level match for your project. And then identify which tool based on if it's one location or multiple locations. Great. Well, I think we probably got to most of the questions in the chat. If you had a question and we didn't get to it, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to answer it now. I don't see any other hands. Last call for questions. Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time this morning. I apologize that we went 20 minutes over. This recording and the slides will be made available on our website probably tomorrow. I don't think we'll get it on today, but definitely tomorrow. Okay. Well, thank you. And again, please use our admin@nbrc.gov email for any future questions. All right. Thank you.